For centuries, Rome didn't disappear. It changed. It moved east into a city built not just to survive, but to endure. Protected by walls that had resisted attack for generations, and a system that had adapted to everything thrown at it. Even after the West fell, it continued for nearly 1,000 more years, long enough for people to believe it might never truly end. Until one day, it did, because in 1453 something changed, not just in the strength of an empire, but in the nature of power itself. And for the first time, the system could no longer hold. The fall of Constantinople is often described as a siege, a military campaign, a moment when a city was taken. But that description focuses on the outcome, not the significance. Constantinople was not just another city. It was the continuation of Rome, a system that had been reorganized, adapted, and preserved across centuries. It had survived invasions, political shifts, economic strain, and internal conflict. Again and again, it had demonstrated the same thing: that it could adjust, that it could endure, and that its structure was strong enough to hold under pressure. Which is what made 1453 different. Because this time, the pressure was not something the system had been designed to handle. And when systems encounter conditions they were not built for, they don't always adapt. Sometimes they end. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476, the idea of Rome did not disappear with it. It continued in the east, centered in Constantinople, a city strategically positioned between continents, controlling key trade routes between Europe and Asia. This location gave it more than wealth. It gave it leverage. Goods flowed through the city: silk, spices, metals, linking distant regions into a network that the empire could influence and benefit from. But trade alone does not sustain a system for centuries. What made Constantinople resilient was its structure. Its administration was organized, its taxation system functioned, its military, while smaller than Rome's at its peak, was disciplined and strategically deployed. And above all, its defenses were unmatched. The Theodosian walls were not just barriers. They were a system in themselves, layered, reinforced, and designed to absorb and deflect repeated assault. For centuries, they had done exactly that. Armies came, tested them, and failed. Because the city was not easy to isolate and even harder to breach. This combination, structure, location, and defense, allowed Constantinople to survive long after the rest of the empire had fallen. But survival is not the same as strength. And over time, the difference began to matter. By the 15th century, the system that had once supported Constantinople was still functioning. But only just. Territory had been lost over generations. Resources had become limited. Population had declined. And the empire that had once extended across vast regions had been reduced to a city and its immediate surroundings. Yet the structure remained. Administration continued. Trade persisted, though at a reduced scale. The walls still stood. And as long as those elements held together, the system appeared stable. But stability at this stage was conditional. It depended on the absence of overwhelming pressure. Because the system no longer had the capacity to absorb major shocks. It could manage routine strain. It could maintain itself under predictable conditions. But it was no longer capable of adapting to something fundamentally different. And that distinction between stability and resilience would define what happened next. To the east, a different kind of system was forming. The Ottoman Empire was expanding steadily, consolidating power across surrounding regions. Unlike earlier forces that had challenged Constantinople, this was not a temporary threat. It was organized, persistent, and strategic. At its center was a young ruler determined to achieve what others had failed to do. Take the city. But this was not approached as a simple assault. It was planned. Resources were gathered. Logistics were prepared. And most importantly, new technology was introduced. large-scale cannons capable of delivering repeated, concentrated force against fortified walls. This was not just another siege. It was a shift in how sieges worked. And the system defending Constantinople had not been built for this. When the siege began in 1453, it was not chaotic. It was controlled. The city was encircled. Supply lines were cut. Positions were established. And then the bombardment began. The walls that had held for centuries were no longer facing occasional assault. They were being tested continuously. Cannons struck repeatedly, weakening sections over time. Defenders responded as they always had, repairing damage, reinforcing weak points, maintaining structure. But this time, repairs could not keep pace, because the attacks did not stop. They were systematic, sustained, and designed to exploit the limits of the defense. What had once been an advantage, the ability to absorb impact, became a liability, because now impact was constant. And as days turned into weeks, the condition of the walls deteriorated, not through a single catastrophic failure, but through accumulation. And as that accumulation continued, the system began to lose its foundation. Eventually, sections of the wall could no longer be restored effectively. Gaps formed, weak points expanded, and the defenders were forced to concentrate their efforts on holding specific areas rather than maintaining the entire structure. This changed the nature of the defense, because once a system shifts from stability to reaction, it begins to lose control. The attackers recognized this. Pressure increased. Assaults became more focused, and the balance that had defined the siege began to shift. Not suddenly, but decisively, because at this stage, the outcome was no longer determined by strength alone. It was determined by endurance, and the system defending the city had reached its limit. The final breach did not come as a single dramatic moment. It came as the point where resistance could no longer be sustained. Defensive lines collapsed. Forces entered the city, and the structure that had held for centuries stopped functioning. There was no recovery phase, no opportunity to reorganize, because the system had depended on continuous defense. And once that defense failed, everything else followed. With the fall of Constantinople, the system that had carried Rome forward for over 1,000 years came to an end. Not gradually, but completely. Control shifted, structures were replaced, and the city became part of a different system entirely. But the significance of that moment extends beyond the city itself, because it marked the end of a system that had demonstrated remarkable longevity, one that had adapted, survived, and maintained function across centuries of change. And yet, even that system had limits, because systems are built for specific conditions, and when those conditions change beyond what they can accommodate, they don't always adapt. Sometimes they end. Sounds fake. It's history. Subscribe for more real history that sounds fake.